Dr. Castleberry here with part 2 of our week 2 video lecture, Comp 2113, Media Culture and Social Influence. John has some questions. I want to read through a couple of these really quick. Consider Berger's assumption concerning the amount of time people spend, involved in media. Has this number increased due to the extensive use of cell phones? So are cell phones a factor, in other words, to this increase in media usage? And the answer is, rather than just saying cell phones are the reason, there are a couple of terms, descriptive terms, that we could apply here that play a major factor. And the first I would suggest is mobility, right? Where we get this the root word for mobile phone, mobility, and accessibility. Okay. What is accessible? What is now available? Maybe and not just available, but when we say accessible, maybe that makes us think also affordable. Okay, so these factors have to be answered before that consumer or that individual, acquires and is able to use said product. But yes, the mobility and the accessibility of these types of smart devices make our ability to consume media instant. Okay, and this is where we get one of our fun media theories that we will read about, this phrase, uses and gratifications theory. All right, this idea that media primarily provides this certain needs-based, not needs but wants, right, based on whether it's leisure or alternative uses, right? This is the broad term, uses and gratifications. With the Roberts text, communication theory, millennial popular culture, on page 2, Roberts says, quote, characteristics of a generation have to be neutral to some extent. People are shaped by historical events and by their environments, among many other things, end quote. Would one of the other things refer to forms of media such as Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter? It could be whatever we encounter that shapes our reality. All right, so whatever we encounter. Speaking of interpersonal communication, so several of you sort of pinged on this term this week on page 5, and the importance of this theory when it comes to millennials are the buzzword of the week. Are interpersonal skills lacking in our millennials, or is their communication skills just different? Yes, than that of the older generation. I'm sensing some experiences folks might be having, right? Let's see. Well, okay. Our interpersonal skills lacking in our millennials. All right, so to overassume, using that term to describe an overall lack of communication, technically, we'll identify this as hasty generalization, all right? And, recognize sometimes this is one of the big tensions, right? Where we come up with these cultural terms to describe certain pockets of people, and we've got this very catchy term in millennial, and even the definition itself of which demographic it comprises is toggled, is in negotiation, and so those years, the people that, well, do I identify with it, or do I identify with characteristics of it different? So that's something we have to consider. But are they different? Sure, absolutely. Not unlike the ways in which we change our wardrobe, the slang, the shorthand, the ways in which we speak, perhaps even the foods we eat, the manner in which our caloric intake is manufactured versus farmed, or what have you. So yeah, these differences can play factors. But it got me thinking of something else, and we've seen in the news recently example where there was the Parkland, Florida shooting. Okay, and so in the aftermath of a tragic public event, you have students going on talk shows because they want to communicate. They need to sort of express themselves in the moment. They're looking for a kind of platform to do it. People, share and emote in times of grief, and in this sort of, collective will, perhaps created an opportunity to have some different types of discussion that maybe not everyone wants to have, and certainly not everyone is aligned with in terms of the ways of thinking about how we deal with these tragedies and some of the other social factors in our everyday lives. But part of the problem was you saw a kind of insulated avenue of responders to the students that appeared on media, right, making claims that they were these are paid actors, right? This is a kind of, we can go down that well of conspiracy theory strands. And one of the issues was there was a catch-22 to the conspiracy theory itself. The accusation was twofold, that either then the main male that kept appearing on, particularly CNN, which would be like that. Of course, that's a red flag target to a certain segment, right, of online voices of maybe even Americans, right? But the young male speaker, he was either accused of, one, talking too smoothly, which is a clear sign or indicator, well, that he's an actor. Because he's been in theaters and stuff, but also because that narrative was perpetuated that this is a paid actor, this is a child actor type of thing. But second, at one point, the same person had a flub, had like an on-air flub where he couldn't articulate himself, right, in a perfect manner. And this is ironic because that too was pointed to suggest, oh, look, clearly this is a paid actor because he can't even remember his lines. And that's so what you're doing then. That's another. So that's in addition to part of a conspiracy theory. It's another logical fallacy. But we're now framing a double bind around the individual so that he can't win either way, right? And that kind of way of painting people into a corner is something we have to be careful of, and in no way, to try to draw that back to our general conversation, is John's question suggesting this at all. But that's where it got me thinking about, right? In the larger scope of all of our questions this week, engaging topics like, what is a millennial? Why are millennials so different from perhaps the older generation or the average working adult, whereas we're all still people at the same time. We're just dealing with different factors in our lives in different ways, right? We can all use some increased discipline and support, right, from one another to help in that way. Okay, let's look at great question coming out from Stuart Hall's Decoding. Great. Decoding? That's a driver's ed essay, I believe. But John, page 508, the statement is made, quote, the event must become the story before it can become the communicative event, end quote. Are television shows and movies created from books an example of this? The great point, the great takeaway out of Hall's essay, and really a landmark essay, it's why it's included in this packet. It's incredibly important for us to consider. But a key point here is that only a strong or clear narrative is going to allow a story to build into a communicative event, right? So when we're talking about communicative events or media events, as John Fisk would call them, there's always going to be a kind of narrative thread at the center, right? Because so it goes, we are drawn to storytelling. Storytelling lies at the heart of so much of how media is shaped and created and presented and received and interpreted and thus decoded. All right. The Understanding Stuart Hall's Encoding Decoding Model through TV's Breaking Bad essay that is both included in the Glenister Roberts book, and also a PDF was uploaded to D2L, but I know you all have the book. Hall argues that, quote, audiences receive and interpret messages differently, end quote. It has been said that there are only a certain number of personalities in our world today. Are there only 3 ways to interpret a text? And that's in reference to Hall's dominant, hegemonic mode, negotiated mode, and an oppositional mode, right, being that third mode of interpretation. And these are titles, right? This is theoretical language used to explain the phenomenon of communication. And it's funny. I know the average response, if I broke out a conversation like this in front of just close friends or family, someone would inevitably just kind of sigh in disbelief and say, enough explaining, right? Why do we have to explain everything? Let's just have a simple conversation. And that sure does sound good. That sure does sound easy. But my goodness, we get into so many squabbles and cultural disagreements and positions, and miscommunication runs rampant in our culture, and even in our everyday lives, to the extent that, well, this is why we develop these theoretical models, because we're having a hard time doing the simple things. Even sometimes we're having a hard time, so theoretical language helps us process it deeper, because when we process it at a deeper level, we are more likely to engage in sort of altering conditions of behavior, ideally toward a positive trajectory. So back to those 3 types that Hall theorizes. Within these descriptive ranges, I'm going to call them ranges, there are variations that spread out in numerous directions. So decoding is a complex process. It can mean a lot of things, a lot of directions to a lot of people. And that's the point he's making. That's the point he wants to make. And hopefully the backup essay helps drive that point home for us. If Unplug and Digital Cleanse suggest, quote, movements away from television as an encroaching medium, end quote, does this relate to oppositional positions of a specific show or TV altogether? It absolutely can. It absolutely can, right? So anything that's going against the grain of the dominant medium that's mass communicating to us, can take on those alternative forms, right? If we're resisting that message. And not to get back on the same thread, but that's exciting, right? This whole idea, like resistance, rebellion. That gets a lot of traction with people, and when they feel like they can align with something like that, I'm kind of, by being on the outside, I'm simultaneously an insider to the real way to do things, and this is somehow, it gives me that tingling sensation, and I think that lends some credence to the cult popularity of a show like InfoWars, right? Where the whole premise of the show is based upon, we're constantly going to rage against the machine, using the methods of the machine, to stake a claim, right? To plant our flag in the sand and say, no! Right after this word from our sponsor, right? Okay, so let's pick it back up, and we will continue along with part 3 of our week 2 video lecture. Thank you.